Hey, Cal here in beautiful Fish Creek Park in Calgary, Alberta. And today's video, I want to talk about a recent conversation I had with a Texas RMLO, which is a residential mortgage loan originator. We were discussing a potential owner finance mortgage note that I was going to be buying. And the situation behind the note was that the original lender who created the owner finance note, who sold the property to a buyer with owner financing. The problem was he did not vet the buyer borrower through a residential mortgage loan originator. And so the borrower bought the house, put a down payment on, created a owner finance mortgage note on the property, and has been paying for the last 4 years on the note consistently. So he's a performing borrower. Everything is great. But this particular owner of the note was wanting to sell it off and cash out. And so the problem with that is if the borrower has not been vetted by an RMLO and basically proving that they can afford the loan, they can repay that loan, they can afford the payments based on their income and credit score and employment and all of that. If the owner finance seller didn't go through that process with the borrower, the risk is that if we were to buy this note and then potentially we have to foreclose down the road later on if the borrower stops making their payments, if that borrower is smart, they may hire an attorney and contest that this was a predatory lending situation where the borrower was put in a loan they could not afford. And then if that's the case, if that attorney is a good attorney, they could fight the foreclosure, and whoever owns that note could be in a heap of trouble because they wouldn't be able to foreclose. Okay, you've got a real tough situation on your hand if that attorney can prove that that borrower couldn't afford that loan to begin with. Okay, so that's why it's very important if you're a note investor and you're going to be buying a note that was originally an owner finance transaction where a property was sold to someone and a note was created by the seller. You want to make sure that that borrower has been vetted by an RMLO and is Dodd-Frank compliant, which is an act that was passed around 2010 to protect borrowers so that they don't get into situations and loans that they can't afford. Okay, so here's the case. So this particular borrower was not vetted because he was a family friend of the person selling the note. Okay. So I'm still looking at buying this particular note, and so I reached out to my RMLO in Texas and asked him for some advice, and he gave me some really great advice, and I wanted to share it with you. So if you're considering buying a note that's owner financed and they weren't vetted, they're not Dodd-Frank compliant, they weren't run through an RMLO and approved, one thing you can do is actually tell the note seller that you want to have that borrower vetted now. Okay, and say that you won't buy that note until that note seller, the note holder, vets that borrower through an RMLO, gets them approved, showing them that they can actually afford that loan and they are Dodd-Frank compliant. Okay, so the tricky part here is that it's going to cost whoever owns that note, it's going to cost them about $1,000 to do that, to run their borrower through an RMLO. But you also have to convince that current borrower who owns a house and has been making their payments, or maybe not, to convince them to provide their income information to be vetted by an RMLO. Okay, and they may not be willing to do that, and so you may have to incentivize them or have the note seller incentivize them by, maybe crediting them 1 month of payments that they get free, they don't have to pay for, or something like that, in order to entice them to want to cooperate to run through that process. But it's that RMLO, he was a pretty smart guy. He's been in the business a while, and he convinced me that it's probably not a good idea to buy a note that hasn't been had the borrower vetted, because it could cause some major headaches down the road. But this is one solution to that problem. So I hope you got value out of this video. I'm Cal Ewing. Subscribe and like this video, and we'll see you on the next one.